Guys, I'm Phil, and I really appreciate all of you joining. This is pretty cool. Boy, you guys are literally all over the world. I appreciate you taking the time to tune in today and have a bit of a discussion about State Department opportunities. I saw a bunch of relevant majors and folks studying some interesting foreign languages. In any event, a lot to talk about and a lot of good opportunities to present to you all. My plan was to do a sort of much briefer version of my typical State Department opportunities presentation. And then I'm happy to, as Peter said, take questions. You can throw those in the chat function, or if you guys want to ask in person at the end, that's cool too. So excellent. Well, thanks for your attention, and let's get started. I should tell you guys at the top that I am not usually a human resources recruiter. Actually, I am a career foreign service officer. So I've been with the State Department for, let's see now, about now it's 15 years. I'm a career public diplomacy officer. So that means I'm the person at the embassy who does all the external affairs work. I work with the press, run cultural programs, run our exchange programs. I'm biased, but I think that that's probably the most fun job that is available out at our embassies. I'm also married to a career foreign service officer. My wife, Cynthia, joined as a political officer and actually switched to consular. So I can speak quite a bit to that career track as well. And in my 15 years, I've worked, in the public diplomacy track, in the political track, and then also in the consular track. So happy to answer questions at the end about what the jobs are really all about, and happy to answer any sort of personal questions too about life and realities in the Foreign Service. Peter, if you want to advance the slideshow. So typically this is where I ask people, has anybody ever been in a US embassy overseas? Then I ask them why, and the vast majority of folks typically say, yeah, I had to get a passport renewed, or I lost my passport, something pretty benign like that. I don't typically have anyone say, yeah, I was arrested, so I sought assistance at the embassy. But these top two pictures that you guys see in the slideshow, these are the two different places that you're going to work in a career with the U.S. Foreign Service. So the picture on the left is the U.S. Department of State building, the main state building in Washington. Career foreign service officers spend about 2/3 of their time overseas at U.S. embassies and consulates, and then about 1/3 of their time back home in Washington doing tours. And you rotate every 1, 2, or 3 years. So it really is a life of kind of constant change that can be pretty amazing and also can be pretty challenging. The second picture, that beautiful yellow building with the cool little cupolas, that is the last U.S. embassy I worked in. It's our U.S. embassy in Ljubljana, Slovenia. I will tell you, the vast majority of American embassies do not look so idyllic like that. That one is plopped down in the city center in Ljubljana, beautiful Central European country. Many of our embassies aren't so beautiful and look more like the Washington building, or as I usually say, like a minimum security prison, right? Such is life. It's a little bit different wherever you go, which embassy or consulate you're in. So that's your career in the Foreign Service, sort of these constant rotations between overseas and Washington. The two pictures on the bottom are pictures that I pulled out from probably the most interesting and exciting tour that I've done, and then also the most exciting tour that my wife has done. So my wife, if you look at the picture of the truck, that is my wife, Cynthia. She is the one in the red shirt with the blowhorn, and that is in the port of Beirut, Lebanon. So Cynthia joined as a political officer. She studied Middle Eastern history at Harvard, got her master's, was a State Department intern in Syria, joined the State Department as a presidential management fellow, so joined into the civil service and then switched over to foreign service. She's a heritage Arabic speaker. And that moment in the truck in Beirut, that was during her third tour. She was the consular chief in Dubai, but there were hostilities between Israel and Lebanon. We decided, I think this was the summer of 2005 or 2006, we decided we had to evacuate all the Americans out of Lebanon. Couldn't take them out by air, couldn't take them out through a land border. So what do? We took them out by boat. So Cynthia was the first Foreign Service officer who flew in to help the Embassy Beirut team, help organize that evacuation of 10,000 Americans who all went out by boat, some on rented cruise ships, some on military boats they lent to the State Department. She always says, when people ask, like, is there some aha moment in your career, some moment where kind of everything comes together? It was when she was standing on the back of this truck using the Arabic that her grandmother had taught her while they were making bread in the kitchen, helping Americans to safety. That was when she realized, like, whoa, crazy. I was totally meant to be here for this moment. She subsequently has become kind of an expert on evacuations, so has worked quite a few of them. The biggest were in Lebanon and then in Haiti after the earthquake. It kind of makes me laugh. It takes a certain amount of crazy to be a person who is flying into the disaster zone, wherever that is. But that's what we need to do to help get American citizens out. And as you guys can imagine, right now is ongoing, basically the biggest evacuation the State Department has ever done, and much, much more complex because it's not just a single country or region, but literally all over the world. I have colleagues, good friend with a consular chief in Serbia, I'm a friend with a consular chief in Honduras, and literally all over the world, our diplomats are working extremely long hours to help get American citizens home. In fact, that's basically the most important thing all of our embassies are working on right now. So that's Cynthia's. I promise if I'm going to get through this presentation in 20 minutes, I've got to be a little bit more brief. So the last picture on this slide is the State Department Operations Center. This is probably my favorite job. It was my third tour. You look at the picture, and this is kind of what I love about the State Department. It's like totally boring, right? It looks like it's like cubicles in a windowless room. There's no fancy technology. This picture was taken 10 years ago, and guys, I promise you, this room looks identical today. This Crisis Communications Center has been operating 24 hours a day, 365 days a year since 1963. And when sometimes during political campaign season, you see a lot of these ads about a 3 a.m. phone call that comes in to a politician to make a decision. Who makes that call? People here in the State Department Operations Center, because we're really the ones who get calls from embassies overseas, consulates overseas. When emergency strikes, this is the U.S. government's kind of first responder, getting those calls in from all around the world, and then alerting State Department principals and then sometimes folks over at the White House about situations occurring all around the world. I loved that job. It was a totally exhausting year. I basically didn't sleep for a year because you were constantly rotating shifts. But also it's the place where you connect the Secretary of State with foreign leaders. And then, as all of us know, people stay on those calls and take notes for the record. So I was on call, listening to calls that Hillary Clinton, who was then Secretary of State, made with Bibi Netanyahu and Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov and Hamid Karzai, and on and on and on. So it's pretty amazing as a third tour officer, a really fresh diplomat, to be able to experience that and hear the Secretary of State duking it out with friends and adversaries all around the world. Okay, so let's move on. I just wanted to say that to give you guys sort of a flavor of the really diverse amount of work there is at the State Department. So who are we? Well, we're about 70,000 people in the US and overseas. Just under 15,000 are actually foreign service, and that's broken up into two buckets, generalists and specialists. Generalists are people like me or my wife, Cynthia. They're political officers, economic officers, public diplomacy, consular, and management. Then the other half of the foreign service are specialists. These are people who come in with specialized skills or degrees. Our service doctors, our information technology specialists, folks are diplomatic security agents, folks like that. So there are two paths into the foreign service. Typically, when I'm at a place like Bates, talking to a lot of folks who are majoring in foreign languages or international affairs, you guys are going to come in through the generalist track by taking the Foreign Service Officer test. But there is this whole other half of the foreign service if you have a more technical degree or more specialized degree that you can join through that. And then we have quite a small civil service when you compare it to other national security agencies. just about 10, 11,000 folks. The vast majority of those positions are in Washington. And the thing that kind of makes the State Department weird and unique for a US government agency, over half of our workforce are actually non-US citizens. These are Foreign Service nationals, all the local staff who staff our embassies and consulates overseas. I've replaced a lot of the stock HR pictures with goofy pictures of me and my team. So here are folks, this was from the July 4th party where we had a green screen in Ljubljana, and you could take a picture visiting different places around the US. So obviously this is my public affairs team in Times Square, right? The local staff are one of my favorite parts about working at the State Department. They are almost always grossly overqualified for their positions, so they're quite brilliant. They are the institutional knowledge, so diplomats rotate every 2 or 3 years. These folks stay. They typically stay for 30 or 40 years, so they're fantastic resources for us and just wonderful representatives of America. Okay. Let's move on to the next slide. Where are we at? We're all over the world, as you guys can imagine. The United States has the world's biggest diplomatic corps, so many options. When you sign up to work in the Foreign Service, you actually sign a memo for worldwide availability. Of the 50 different pages I had to sign when I joined in 15 years ago, this is the only one I actually remember because I remember sort of gulping when I signed on the dotted line and thinking, worldwide availability, wow. So they could literally send me anywhere. Yes, that is the truth. When you sign up, you say that you're worldwide available. And your first 2 tours are directed. So that means the department looks at your preferences, looks at the available jobs we have, looks at your skill set, and then sorts everybody out. Sometimes this absolutely makes sense. Like, let's say you've been studying Mandarin for years, or for my wife, Cynthia, she was an Arabic speaker. She really wanted to go to the Middle East. And sure enough, her first tour was in Jerusalem, and her second tour was in Amman, Jordan. Other times, this makes no sense. You're a Mandarin speaker, but the department doesn't have any Mandarin jobs on the list when you come in, and so you end up in someplace random like Trinidad and Tobago. So it just depends. You have to be flexible and adaptable, particularly for those first 2 tours. After that, you have much more say in where you go, and you can really develop a kind of regional specialty if you want, and focus on jobs that you very personally are interested in. Okay, next slide, please. So what we do, you guys probably have a pretty good idea of this. We protect and advocate for US interests, protect American citizens, implement the president's foreign policy, advise on foreign policy, and really serve as the US government's coordinator for all foreign policy. Top picture is our current Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo. The bottom picture is me from my second tour. That was in Trinidad and Tobago. I was a consular officer that tour, so I spent most of my time behind a visa window. Which was interesting, definitely. But this picture is from when I spent 2 weeks aboard a US military hospital ship that was sailing all around the Caribbean, or cruising, I guess is the word that Navy uses, cruising all around the Caribbean. And they had me on as the kind of local political advisor to make sure that when they docked in Trinidad and Tobago, that they wouldn't make any big mistakes. So the cool part, one of the most cool parts about the Foreign Service is you always end up doing unexpected things no matter where you go. That second tour when I was a consular officer was also the only time I've worked on a presidential visit. So President Obama's first overnight overseas visit was to Trinidad and Tobago. That sounds crazy. I don't think anyone would have ever guessed that. But Trinidad and Tobago was hosting the Summit of the Americas that year. So President Obama took the opportunity right after his inauguration to meet a lot of the heads of state, heads of government from the Western Hemisphere. So we had him and Secretary Clinton down. And because our embassy was so small, I was the person who was the control officer for the White House press corps. So my job for that 2 weeks was to set up a temporary White House briefing and press room in a hotel. And I got to meet all of the sort of famous White House journalists that I'd been watching on TV for a while. So pretty cool opportunity there. Okay, next slide. Who are we looking for? Well, we're looking for you guys. Incredibly diverse and talented group of Americans. We take folks from across all different academic disciplines. Really, we don't care what you're studying or what your major was. I have colleagues who joined the Foreign Service and were creative writing majors, all the way to engineers. So a lot of folks do come in as international affairs majors, or maybe a foreign language, or political science or government, but we really take a wildly diverse group of folks. We represent the United States overseas, and it is written in law that we must be representative of the US. All measures of diversity, gender, racial and ethnic diversity, geographic diversity, socioeconomic diversity, etc. Okay, slide please. So I typically spend time talking about 4 different ways to work at state. I'm going to kind of buzz through this very quickly for you guys based on the opportunities I think that are most interest. So we'll talk student programs and internships. I won't say too much about civil service. The reason why is because there are not so many civil service opportunities, particularly for recent grads. Most of our civil service jobs are for folks with graduate degrees and at least a few years of specialized experience. But if you guys have civil service related questions about working as a career in Washington, let's get to those at the end. Then foreign service, and then consular fellows. Consular fellows in particular, for those folks I saw who listed their majors as Chinese, fantastic. This is an opportunity for folks who speak Arabic, Chinese, Spanish, or Portuguese. It's a limited appointment, so government bureaucracy speak for a contract of up to 5 years. So those are the things I'll talk about. Let's go ahead on student programs. State Department has a few different student programs. The biggest one is our unpaid internship that's offered all throughout the year. There are 3 cohorts: summer, fall, and spring. Summer is by far the biggest. So my advice is, if you could possibly do the internship in fall or spring, consider applying then. It's unpaid. You can do the internship in DC or overseas. Many of our embassies and consulates accept interns. The most important thing to remember about this program is the application deadlines are absurdly early. So a summer application deadline is going to be in September the previous year. So this coming September, when you guys get back to school, hopefully, and the world is no longer virtual, that's when you would go ahead and apply for the summer 2021 internship program. Basic eligibility requirements: you have to have junior status, so you can apply as early as September of your sophomore year, right? Because you do the internship after sophomore year when you're technically at junior status. You have to have at least a 3.2. And you have to be an American citizen. Almost all the opportunities I have to talk about are American citizen only. Okay, second student program I want to mention to you guys, the application for this will open up in July. It's just a month-long application period. It's called the Virtual Student Foreign Service. Again, it's unpaid. This is a virtual internship. It runs through the academic year. So this July it will open up. You apply by the end of July, you find out in August if you get it, and then you do it concurrent to your studies all academic year. So from September until May of next, from 2020, 2021. I was not particularly sold on this the first time I'd heard about it. It's virtual and unpaid. I was like, who's going to do this, right? But I got to admit, guys, that the past year and a half doing recruiting, I've talked to tons of students who've had a really positive experience with this. And I suspect, you know, as things go with current events, this is going to be extremely popular. And I suspect get a lot of applications this summer. Basically, we hook you up with a mentor in Washington or at an overseas embassy or consulate, and you do a project during the academic year or a series of projects. Your commitment is roughly 10 hours a week, but it is totally organic and flexible. You decide with your mentor when you work and how you work. So it is a really flexible opportunity to do a State Department experience, an internship experience that is completely organic and flexible and on your own time. If you go to vsfs.state.gov, virtual student foreign service.state.gov right now, you'll see the projects that students are finishing up from this year, give you a great sense of what projects will likely be on the list in July. Really strongly recommend you guys take a peek at that. You can search it by country, you can search it by skills. Lots of pretty cool projects that you could do and that will complement your academic work during the school year. Okay, Pathways program, that's a paid internship. I kind of laugh. Those are very, very rare, very hard to get, and the vast majority of them are in Washington. So I think I'll pass on getting into those more unless you guys have other questions. And then fellowships. If you could pop ahead. Okay, so the State Department has a handful of really impressive fellowships. For those of you who are interested in working in Washington as a career, for my 2 cents, the single best program you can look at is the Presidential Management Fellowship. Now, I will warn you, this is for folks, you can apply to it coming out of graduate school. So it might feel like a long way away for you guys if you're undergrads, but put this in the back of your head. For my 2 cents, the single best way to get a federal job and to get your foot in the door for the federal civil service is that Presidential Management Fellowship. It's government-wide, not just State Department, but State Department is a huge hirer of folks who get this fellowship. I think we hire at least 10% of the PMF classes every year. The other 4 fellowships I have down here, you can all of these are applicable to undergrads. So Pickering, Wrangell, and Payne. These are programs which you could apply for as early as September of your senior year in undergrad. They give you $100,000 to pay for graduate school. It has to be an international affairs oriented program in the States. 2 paid internships, 1 in Washington, 1 overseas, and then you fast track into the Foreign Service. Absolutely amazing programs if you're interested in getting a grad degree and joining the Foreign Service. Your commitment is 5 years in the Foreign Service to pay back that $100,000 we gave you to pay for grad school. Pickering and Wrangell, we select 30 people for those fellowships, so 30 Pickerings, 30 Wrangels every year. The applications, like I said, open in September, so September your senior year is the earliest you could apply. Payne, that application deadline is in November, and that tracks you as a Foreign Service officer into USAID. So if you're particularly interested in development, that's a good one to look at. All 3 of those are diversity focused. As I said before, wide umbrella on diversity. We are looking for folks who represent all of America. So you can kind of figure out and think through whether you qualify or whether you might be competitive for those programs. Anyone can apply, but you sort of have to think through like, okay, you know, what's my pitch? How can I show that I showcase the diversity of America? The last program, the IT Fellowship, that's for folks who are computer science or IT related majors. That's a newer fellowship, the exact same benefits, and then you fast track into the Foreign Service as an IT specialist. Okay, let's move on. Also, I want to point out the State Department sponsored foreign language programs. I'm not a recruiter for these because they're not work programs, but I always remind students of these. If you're interested in international careers, all of these are wonderful, wonderful opportunities to gain experience and to learn foreign languages. Literally all of them pay you to live overseas and study and learn foreign languages. They're all different, so you really have to do your research. Critical language, Gilman, Boren, Fulbright, some are needs-based, some are not, some have a research component, some don't. So you can start your search at exchanges.state.gov and really kind of figure out what might apply for you. Some are undergrad focused, some are grad, some are either, but I really encourage you guys, if you're interested in an international focused career, check out those foreign language programs. Great way to build skills and build your credentials. Okay, next slide. Thanks. So Foreign Service. I try to give you guys a little bit of a flavor for some of the adventure and fun of a career in the Foreign Service, talking about some of my tours thus far and my wife Cynthia's tours. The main reasons to join, as far as I'm concerned, it is hard for me to think of any job or career that sort of better combines this idea of public service and an overseas lifestyle. I always knew that I wanted to do a job in public service, although as a kid, I thought that I'd end up at the local level or doing something back home in the state of Michigan. And then I went on a study abroad, and like, cue the cliche, was like, oh my gosh, that was amazing and wonderful. And I've got to figure out how to do something that's public service focused and also has an international component. And that's what led me to the Foreign Service. So I think if these are two things that are kind of driving you, it's a really wonderful way to combine them. The work is incredibly challenging, and it is constantly changing. So for folks who have deep intellectual, I'd say broad intellectual curiosity, it is a fantastic career, because when you change your jobs every 2 or 3 years, you're changing everything: where you live, the language you're speaking, the kind of food you're eating, who you're working with, the issues that you're working on. So it's really a life of constant change and variety. That is incredibly edifying and interesting. It also can be totally exhausting. So there are pluses and minuses. When I joined up as a single 25-year-old, it was amazing. I mean, you land in a new country and you have nothing but time to explore and meet people. It is a lot more challenging married with 2 little kids. I will fully admit that. I'm happy to talk a bit more about that at the end too, if you guys have questions. So great way to combine public service, overseas lifestyle, do challenging and constantly changing work. I love that there's also a lifelong learning component, because you're switching jobs so frequently. You're switching, you have to learn your different job, your different role. As the public diplomacy officer, that means sometimes I'm doing press work, and then the next tour I'm running some kind of cultural exchange program, and then I'm heading back to Washington and doing something different altogether. So there's a lot of professional learning. Also, for folks who love language learning, there is a huge opportunity to continue to add foreign languages to your portfolio. This is great if you are a natural linguist like my wife. You learn very quickly, even hard languages. If you are not a natural linguist like me, it also can be a lot of fun. I spent a year in Serbo-Croatian training, 6 months in Slovenian training. And, I still sometimes find it hard to believe that I can get paid full time to learn a foreign language. So if you love to learn foreign languages, it's a pretty sweet opportunity too. Okay, next slide. So the last big career opportunity I wanted to talk about was our Consular Fellows program. I alluded to this earlier. This is a limited career appointment. So that's how we say an up to 5-year contract. For folks to do consular work. So immigrant visas, visitor visas, and American citizen services. I pitch this as a great way for people who kind of at the beginning of their career arc. If you happen to have these specialty language skills, Arabic, Mandarin, Spanish, or Portuguese, this is a fantastic opportunity for you. For all intents and purposes, you're doing identical work as an entry-level foreign service officer. You come to Washington for a few months, get your basic training in consular, and then we ship you out to use your foreign language. So you're doing interesting work for the US government, you've got a security clearance, pretty good pay and benefits, housing's included, housing and all your utilities. We get you overseas and back, of course, if you're married or have kids, take care of your kids' school, bring your family. And you get to use and further develop your foreign language. So it's a really great opportunity, I think, to build your skills, and a good thing for people to look at as they're still maybe on the kind of the beginning of their career, path. I talk to a lot of people who are interested in a career foreign service job and then also consular fellows. And I tell people, cast a wide net, apply for both. The process is very, very similar. But they are separate, and you can't transition directly. There's no way to sort of morph from a consular fellow into a foreign service officer, but you can basically take the test and get in. And my attitude is, what job is better to help you prepare to be a career foreign service officer than literally doing the work of one, right? So that's why I think this Consular Fellows program in particular is a great opportunity for recent grads, and folks who are kind of starting out. So, okay, I've talked for a while. I think that's my last or second to last slide. This slide important because it's got my email, dirnewengland@state.gov. So if people, I really encourage folks to ask questions now so we can use the rest of our time to hone in on anything that I've said or other questions you guys have. But also if something sort of percolates or you have a much more specific question you don't want to ask in front of the group, you can get in touch with me at that dirnewengland at state.gov email. We can either set up a time to chat, or if it's a quick answer, I can shoot back the response over email. So that's the best way to get in touch with me. And I think with that, probably I will stop talking on the presentation, and then I'm happy to take your questions.